Donato,
Yes,
welcome to AVID Investors.
thank you for having us.
We've got these folks on Zoom.
All right.
We've got these folks here, and as long as you're standing roughly there, everyone should be able to see you. How about what we need to know?
All right, so I'm gonna go through something that you guys probably heard a few times with Dan and Ron doing presentations, and I'm sure if you talk to appraisers at the county, kind of the disclaimer before I go into what we're seeing for this year. So what is the job of the appraisal division? Our job is to appraise real and personal property in Ada County through recognized and approved mass appraisal techniques. Idaho code requires assessors to assess all properties in the county at market value as of January 1st. Assessments should reflect your property's market value as of January 1st of every year based on previous year's time-adjusted market data. We do analyze large quantities of sales and information, and we build mathematical models using approved mass appraisal techniques. And based on those models and techniques, we try to produce well-reasoned value estimates. Having said that, Idaho property tax administrative rules do allow for a variance of 10% on either side of that market value, so between 90 and 110%. We do go through a ratio study analysis that the state tax commission we have to pass to the state tax commission. They test all our assessment levels to make sure that they meet uniformity and reliability, and they do that on 5 categories. They do that on vacant land residential, improved residential, vacant commercial, improved commercial, and manufactured homes, and we have to pass on all of those categories. Be within that 90 to 110%. All right, the big question: what are we seeing at the assessor's office for this year's trends? I'm going to speak about the single-family dwellings and then the multifamilies. For single-family dwellings, residential properties, they appear to have been in a downtrend since mid-May of last year. However, as we move into the first quarter of 2023, there looks like to be some stability. I don't know if that's maybe the spring effect going on. I guess we'll just have to wait and see where the rest of the quarters come in. Our analysts did give us a time adjustment for those single family dwellings, and it's coming in at minus 1.63 per month.
Can you explain that a little bit, Tato? Minus 1.63 per month is the time adjustment for
single family dwellings, as we're looking at sales from last year. So as we adjust from assessments last year's, we're having to adjust 1.63% per month to meet that 100% of market value as of this year.
And so would the formula on that be, let's say $1 million,
Okay.
and it's sold in October 1st. So you would take $1 million, like, would you?
So you would discount it October 1st, so 3 months down to all the way to January 1st, 2023. So you'd be looking at 1.63% per month for 3 months.
So minus 1.63 equals something, take that minus 1.363% equals something else, take that minus 1.63% equals our January 1st value.
Right.
Great, so when we're using comps from, because I think we're, depending on what your model, what do you call your modeling when you only look at a certain percentage of the properties individually? And the rest of it.
Right, so reappraisal, so we reappraise 25% of the properties in the county. Now, reappraisal means that we're physically looking at the properties. We look at orthos, meaning satellite pictures, and we drive by the properties. We make sure that we're catching all the characteristics, make sure we're updating any changes, remodels, updating. But we do assess every single property in the area. So those 25% get a closer look and a drive-by and the satellite review. However, all of them have to be reassessed and actually modified to the 100% of market value.
And for that, you're using the formula.
Yes, we use mass appraisal. So unlike your fee appraisal, we can't look at 3 to 6 properties for every house that we have. Most of us have 9,000 properties each. So it would take decades for us to be able to comp each property to 3 or 6 comps.
How do you select the 25%?
It depends on the appraisal year. So we go 5 years out. So we're looking at houses that were appraised 5 years ago, and then we go into the next cycle, which would be next year for houses that were appraised 4 years ago. Yeah,
How do you select the individual property?
they're part of that grouping that was reappraised the years 4 years ago. So as we move through the years, I guess once
It's territory.
it's a territory, right? So it's a process that's been in place. So we go by territory, by area, and by section ground, basically. Yeah, so we divide Ada County in sections, square miles, and we go by those section grounds.
Is it possible to know if your property, if it's been physically looked at or it's?
Yeah, you can call us, and I believe 2 years ago, we started sending out reappraisal surveys. So if you receive the reappraisal survey in the mail, it means your property was in reappraisal. Or you can call us and say, when was my property reappraised? However, it does get assessed yearly, so the value is going to be 100% regardless if it's been reappraised or just assessed for that year.
So what's the difference between a reappraisal and an assessment?
It's that physical inspection that we do,
So
right?
The physical is called a reappraisal.
Yeah. All right, anything else? Good. All right, going back to the trends, income properties, unlike single family dwellings, they seem to have been buffered from economic influences that have affected the single family homes. And we're actually seeing an uptrend on those multifamilies. Although overall adjustments are going to depend on the dwelling type, the year built, and where it's located, they are in an uptrend. And the analyst did give us a 0.84% per month adjustment on those. So unlike the single families, the multifamilies are seeing an uptrend. This is the first time I've seen that. I've been at the assessor's office almost 10 years. And this is the first year where I've seen the multifamilies kind of break trend from the single family homes. And I think you hinted to it with the interest rates. So I kind of went online looking for data to justify what's going on. I get curious too. So, and I pulled up some statistics, some charts here. So the first one shows home affordability via interest rates. So this is pretty interesting. This assumes a $1,600 monthly payment, assuming a 10% down payment and the average 30-year mortgage rate. So at the peak of 2020, where we were going through COVID, that $1,600 payment, 10% down payment would afford you a $430,000 house. And this is national numbers. This is not to Treasure Valley. $430,000 at the peak. That number now, considering new mortgage rates, is down to $266,000 as of March of this year. So it's almost half. And if you guys want to take a guess what it was at the bottom of 2008, 2009, what the $1,600 payment would it afford you? If you care to take a guess.
We do.
So we're at 480?
Yeah.
At the bottom of 2008 crash, 2008, 2009, what the 1,600?
The heights are higher than.
I was thinking the same, our guess was $1 million.
Probably 400.
No, so 431 at the peak of 2020, 266 right now. Bottom of 2008, 2009 was about $280,000.
Oh.
So we're currently lower than 2008, 2009. So that just goes to show you what interest rates really do for affordability. The next chart shows the gap between rents and monthly home payments. So I keep bringing 2008, 2009. I don't want it to be like dooming or anything, but I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just talking about the numbers. So next chart shows the gap between rents and monthly home payments. Right before the crash, at the peak, the gap between a rent and a monthly home payment was about $795. then it crashed. At the bottom of this curve, where rents and monthly payments came to be the closest, was about $53 difference. So from $795 to $53. You guys want to take another guess where we're at right now? I'll tell you, $638. So you could see that as you know, the monthly payments are actually affected by these economic influences a lot more than what a rent would be. And you can see a steady uptake of the rents while mortgage payments are just going like this. And it just shows that it's just a more, you know, it's just a safer alternative to just having a mortgage payment.
So it's cheaper to rent, is what you're saying.
At this point, yeah, that's basically what it's getting down to, yeah. And again, it's showing exactly how it was back right before it crashed in 2006, 2007, and then it took that dip. Where we're going?
I think the only difference would be the amount of equity that's around now compared to 2000.
Right, yeah, probably. Next chart here, before I continue on, is the household purchasing power. This shows the US personal savings as a percentage of disposable income. So how much money were US households saving at the peak versus at the bottom here. During COVID, we got up to 34%. So we were saving almost 34% of our disposable income. Right now, at the end of 2022, that 34% has shrunk down to 2.3%. That is the lowest since 2005, which means that if you're trying to save money for a down payment, it's getting harder and harder and harder. So again, showing how your single family dwelling, they're dipping for a reason, because it's a lot harder to buy a house. You're having to put down money and you can't save enough for it.
And that 34% you said was when?
That was at the peak. So 05, 2020. So right after COVID, when they put the interest rates down to 0. Yeah. It kind of just blends in. It's about May, June.
So you're saying when rates were super duper low, everyone was saving a bunch of money. We also had the stimulus coming.
Right, and that was part of it also. So
Yeah.
people weren't traveling, they were saving money. There was nothing to spend money on. You're saving 34%. You could buy a nice house. Now it's the complete opposite. Anyways, that data was just there to show that income properties are just a safer asset, even through rough economic times. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the appeal process. I'm sure you guys are well aware of the appeal process here, but I'll just run through it. The assessments are mailed out at the end of May. If you feel that your assessment value is not reflective of what it would be sold on the open market as of January 1st, we do encourage to call your appraiser and submit any market information that support your position. The appraiser assigned to your property will consider any evidence that you wish to provide. All the contact information and instructions are going to be in the back of your assessment notice. If the assessor and the property owner do not agree, the property owner may, according to Idaho Code 63501A, file an appeal of an assessment to the County Board of Equalization. The appeal must be made in writing. It must be filed on or before the 4th Monday in June. And that can be done on our website, on the commissioner website, in person. You guys can come down to the office, grab a form, fill it out right there.
So you're saying that there's a process before you even have to do the appeal where you can just have a conversation,
Right.
and then if you don't end up with the value you think, then you do the appeal?
Yes. So the way it works is that regardless if you file the appeal formally or not, you're going to end up having a conversation with the appraiser, because the appeal does trickle down to us regardless. So we're going to end up giving you a call and say, let's talk about this. The appeal process it's a safeguard in place for you to make sure that if we don't agree, it goes to that step, that next step.
And Bonnie, we always recommend, it has been trading something for years, that you start with that name and on your appraisal notice, your assessed value notice, starting with that person and coming armed with comps and data. And usually you'll know, or your agent will know how close that value is. And, I consider it a service to my clients. They call me and say, hey, I think my appraisals, my assessed value is way off. A lot of people have a gut for it, like, a couple years ago, I think, yeah, no, but this year I expect I might get a few more phone calls and we help our clients with that. So take advantage of your agent connection or me and, ask.
Yeah, CMAs are huge. CMAs, appraisals. If you come in armed with one of those, obviously we can't guarantee an adjustment, but it makes the conversation go much smoother. You're not just getting information from us saying, this is what we're seeing, this is what the value is. Comparative market analysis.
Is it a BPO suffice as well?
Same thing,
Same thing, okay. That's for more commercial and
broker price opinion,
oh, okay, gotcha.
it's basically the same.
Comps, really, they just want to see comps. And they're gonna look at them and,
Right, right.
they'll ask really good questions about them. So it's nice to be familiar with the comps they're sending and.
A lot of homeowners go to Zillow, which is, it's understandable. There's not a lot of information for homeowners out there. It's a non-disclosure state. We have a hard time getting sales. So a CMA and talking to a real estate agent is the best way to go. I mean, they'll be able to tell you first thing, if you're way off, we're way off, and if we can meet in the middle, you're right there. But again, it's not guaranteed. It's just an extra step that saves us a lot of back and forth.
So when you were talking about the reassessment process, so I understood that you physically inspect every property every 4 to 5 years. And then all properties are adjusted based on the total market analysis every year. But what if the property is bought or sold? Does that trigger the reassessment for a drive-by?
No,
Okay.
it doesn't. No,
Okay.
no. Yeah, I think
Does that enter into whatever databases you use to establish your mass appraisal
It does.
values?
every single sale that occurs in the year prior to the assessment year, so 2023, we're looking at 2022 sales, all of those sales, we have to look at. Every appraiser looks at all the sales that occur in the area. So we have to make sure that we classify those sales. For example, you have a house that's been completely remodeled in a subdivision of original 1950 homes. You're not going to use that sale as a benchmark for a 1970 home, 1950 home, if it's been completely gutted and remodeled. So that sale, I don't want to say it's excluded, but it's put on the back burner and used for remodel homes as such.
So does the actual price you pay for the home have any is it relevant at all to the appraisal, or is it based on? So if you got a great deal or you got ripped off,
Well,
does any of that matter?
I mean, we're not gonna benchmark to the sale, but it is thrown in the pool of sales. So no, the short answer is no. It is what it is. It is what you paid for. We're not gonna necessarily benchmark that your home value to the sale, but it's thrown in the mix of the pool of sales that we use to appraise homes.
And then-
Yeah, the reason for that is that we do mass appraisal, so I can't isolate your property and assess it individually without touching every other property. So your sale affects every other sale. If you live in a subdivision of average homes, 400,000, and then you have a home that sells for $900,000, I can't just go and change that one home to $900,000. We call it shooting the sale. It's a big no-no. We have to use that one sale and put it in a pool of sales for that subdivision. And it might just be an outlier. So otherwise, you would have to benchmark to that one sale and you would have $400,000 homes going up to 900,000. Now you have a 125% increase and people would be outraged for that one neighbor. I mean, I wouldn't want to be that one guy being there.
What's the correlation between Zillow values or appraisals and your county?
So 0 correlation. They have, as a matter of fact, they went through a lawsuit. You guys probably heard about that one. They call it a zestimate for a reason, and that's because it's not an assessment and it's not an estimate. It's a zestimate. They use their own algorithm. It has nothing to do with what we do. It has nothing to do with a fee appraisal or anything else. They do their own thing. They have their own algorithms that I have no idea how it works. They throw sales in, similar sales. I mean, my house hit an astronomical price in 2021. I said, let's sell it right now. I mean,
Yeah, they have their algorithm thing, so if you, but what's the correlation between their valuing the house, the same house, their value?
I don't think they,
And since the valuation is not
I get
crazy.
that they. We're using a specific time frame of data, reflective of an individual calendar year. Whereas Solo is a culmination of, a lot of data points. And then you're coming up with an average based on the physical characteristics of your house. So yes, the easiest example there would be, we're operating on an effort to be within a 10% margin of error on either side of accuracy. Theirs is greater than 25%. So that's the range of, variance when you look at a specific number as it relates to something that's coming, from an algorithm.
Very like to bring that up, if we were using, if I was using Zillow, and then with the CMA.
Yeah.
But what's the likelihood that I'd have some stature with regard to?
Well, I would say probably not very much. I can't say.
Unless you were getting your sold data from Zillow and just
Yeah.
using that as comps that were
Yeah.
also
Again,
supported by the
I
MLS.
can't speak specifically to a particular case or a particular property. But generally speaking, those values that we get from there aren't really reflective of what we're attempting to do as far as reach full market value with a plus or minus range that's much higher than theirs. And we don't know when they collected that data or where it came from.
So-
I found that a lot of Zillow's data is based on listings, not off the sold data.
Mhm.
So our data is based off sold data from the previous year. Their stuff is right now, what the listing's doing right now. And if you get some crazy realtor out there listing a house for way more than it's really worth, it really throws off their data.
And you'll watch that Zillow, that particular house is.
Oh, yeah, that's what's going
Shoot
crazy.
up, as soon as you
Yeah.
list it for $3 million, all of a sudden your estimate goes way higher. As soon as you do a price drop, your estimate decreases.
and the
So
biggest
you're
thing,
getting active data, like Ron just said.
and the biggest thing is that we concentrate, each appraiser has their own area of concentration. So we're not grouping brand new homes with 1970s homes. We're not grouping different types. We try to maintain a strata that is, you know, pretty specific to an area. And we do that with each area. So within one reappraisal area, you're going to have multiple areas of appraisal so that we are pretty specific with the sales that we use for that one group.
Have all your statistics you talk about now, been only for residential?
Yes, I'm just residential. Ron is the commercial, yeah.
So I have a couple of properties that if I look them up on Zillow, it says that they're single family homes. These are old homes. One was built in 1962, the other was built in 1900, but they're really triplexes. And so I've been always very curious about if the estimate is based on what Zillow says, if it's a single family home or how, you know, because that's a lot of years for the data to be wrong.
I think Zillow does grab information from the counties or I think that's where they kind of steal the information from. So if you're seeing that information wrong on Zillow, chances are that we have it wrong. Now for older properties like 1900s, I mean, even I don't want to say too older properties, but there is issues that we need to fix if that's the case. The thing is that we don't have access to homes unless we're invited in.
Right.
So if you have a property that's had changes throughout the years, there's no way for us to know unless the property sells. The owner lets us in, or this happens a lot, your neighbor doesn't like you and it tells on us. So, and it happens more often than not. And that's the only way we're gonna be able to fix that. Otherwise, we're just gonna keep going the way we think it is. And from the outside, unless we're able to tell that it went from a single family to a triplex on our drive-by, there's no way for us to. So if you do come across any of those homes that have issues on Zillow or any other website, let us know and we'll get it fixed.
You did mention also, if you got a really good deal on a property. So that. While that data is used as part of the aggregate for the analysis. It very well could be that your assessment will come in much higher than what you paid for it. Because we're supposed to be at market value, and if you got a good deal.
we're still supposed to be a market value. We don't assess to each individual sale.
Did you have a question?
I was wondering, wanted to understand how, if Idaho is a non-disclosure state, are you still have access to what homes are sold for then, the price?
We have,
MLS data?
yeah, we have an agreement with the MLS.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of gets in some gray area when it comes to that, because we have an agreement with the MLS and we can't technically disclose some of the information that we get from the MLS because it's a paid system. So we get some data and sometimes we're kind of having to get right. It's that's the problem with non-disclosure state. It's just so hard to get data, and it's even harder for us to be able to share it to with homeowners and for issues like appeals and things of that sort.
Yeah, like you said, MLS, we are a member of, we have access to that information. But it's proprietary information, so it's not available for us to readily give out, unless it's under, an appeal process. So, I mean, if you were to call me on the phone and say, what did that house sell for?
Call your realtor.
I can't give you that information.
Yeah.
So, but if you were to appeal a property, and we, determined the, comparables that we thought were reasonable in defense of that value, we can certainly, provide those to you at that point.
That's not to say though that we can't talk about sales. So I can easily say there's a house similar to yours just down the street. It's sold for this. There's a house over here. It's sold for this, but not necessarily specifics about the sale. Yeah. And that's where the CMA comes in really handy, because now you have that information and we can actually talk about the information that you have in the sales. Yeah.
So does the condition of your property, because it feels a bit one-sided. You have all the data, we don't. But we don't feel that it's fair based on whatever, and sometimes so it's hard to know without involving a realtor. Is there a genuine way, is it like worth our bother to try to call and have this conversation? So that's one question. The other question is, if the inside of the property is, maybe far worse than what you would know from the outside, is that worth having a conversation about?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we don't have access to properties. So from the last time that we were either into the property or we received information about the property, most likely an MLS sale, that's the last time we have information about the property. So if your home sold as a completely remodeled home, and then say hypothetically there was a flood or a fire, and now it's been 5 years and you've got that issue ongoing and we haven't resolved it, we most likely have your property as this remodel, without having corrected the issue of, say, the flooding, the fire, or anything like that. So it is in your best interest, as soon as it happens, to let us know. So we can make adjustments for that. Absolutely, yeah.
When you get your assessment notice in the mail, I guess I like to describe it as, this would be what would be typical in the marketplace for a home of your physical characteristics. We would expect it to sell for. If your house has elected deferred maintenance to it, chances are it may sell for less than the assessment. And if you maintain that property well or made some improvements to it along the way, it may sell for more than the assessment. But generally speaking, when you get that assessment in the mail, I describe it as, okay, this is what's typical in the market. We got the variances that happen outside of that. That's that plus or minus. Yes, I describe it plus or minus 7% in the idea of motivation between buyers and sellers and economic conditions that are happening. In a more typical market, we haven't had a different market for a long time, but generally speaking, if we got some equilibrium in demand and supply, you can expect to see a 7% variance of price relative to motivation of buyers and sellers. Coupled with that, based on the requirements of mass appraisal and how we appraise these properties, and we're applying a one size fits all factor to all properties within the neighborhood. The chances are we're not gonna get exact views on every single property type within that neighborhood. Based on that, we're looking at a variance of plus or minus 10% relative to the statutory guidance. So when you get that assessment notice, look at it and say, okay, am I within a 10% margin of error with that value that's been established for the property? If that's the case, then we're reasonably doing what the assessors attempting to do. If you do have elected deferred maintenance, some of those issues may be things that we've already addressed in the appraisal. Others may be more permanent. Maybe you've got crack foundation issues that require some additional repair that's unique to the market. Maybe you've got some other issues that might be more than just elected deferrals. If you say you need a new roof, that we are addressing that in our depreciation schedule based on this age. That's typical wear and tear. If the roof blows off, then I guess we got another problem, right? Okay, so those, if you're just talking about elected deferred maintenance, most of that's already built into our appraisal. That hopefully answers some of your questions.
So how many folks appeal, and how many, I mean, this, of course, I don't expect an actual number, but just generally, how many, do 5% of the people appeal, 1%?
Out of over 250,000 parcels, we had 1,100 people is all that filed appeals last year.
And then of those 1,100, how many experience adjustments?
I can't even remember.
I don't remember. It was a pretty low,
It
a
was
pretty low count. Yeah, it's,
Very few of them actually make it to a hearing,
yeah,
whether, as soon as you do the appeal, it goes to the county commissioner's office. They'll then put it into the system, and then within about a day, we'll get notification of it. The appraiser will look at it. And generally, the property owner will put a narrative and give some good information as to why they think that the assessment is too high. The appraiser can then check that out, verify it, and then call the property owner and talk to them about the situation. In some cases, it's an easy fix. In some cases, it's not justified. But a lot of times, whether they get an adjustment or not, a lot of times people will withdraw their hearing even at that point, because we've got a lot of data, a lot of sales data to support that assessment. And unless you have really compelling data to counter that, it's probably not worth the time.
That's what I've always thought, is like, he's like David and Goliath, like, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can say, and we're not always right. I had a property owner call me a few months ago and said, hey, I've got this sixplex that was one of the old houses down in the north end that was converted to apartments, and she said, well, it used to be sixplex, but now it's only 4. Because we had to we're redoing the basement units. And so I said, all right, well, I need to come out and do an inspection, just verify it. And so I met her out there and looked at it. We went through one of the rentable units was vacant. So we looked at that as well. And I found that not only did I need to remove those 2 units from the income approach, but it was not in good condition. So I needed to make adjustments elsewhere as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that it's, useless to do it, but if you have real good data, then yeah, absolutely.
I call it formal and informal appeal process. Informal is picking up the phone and calling your appraiser. I mean, the phone number is directly right on the assessment notice. So if you have any questions or concerns, make that phone call and have them explain to you where that value was derived from. And if you're still uncomfortable with that and you want to provide additional information in support of your opinion of value, the appraiser would be glad to look at that. If you get to a point to where you're unable to reach an agreement relative to those full costs, then you always have the formal approach to appeal, which would be have the hearing before the Board of Equalization for them to render an opinion as to what the value is. So then the board will look at the appraiser's opinion of value and the evidence that was supported to that versus what the development has and the evidence that they have to support their opinion. And then they'll make a decision.
So in this example that you gave, would that have been considered the informal process or was it the formal process?
So it would be informal because it actually happened not even within the appeals time.
Oh, okay.
She called me, I think it was around August timeframe, and just said, hey, we're doing these changes and wanted to see if this would affect the value. It does.
Okay.
And he brings up a good point.
He calls anytime.
Right, that's
Okay.
the thing is that you don't have to wait, if there's issues with your house that need to be addressed in the assessment, give us a call anytime. If there is condition issues, we can easily adjust for the value. Obviously, it'll affect the value for the following assessment year, but we can make those adjustments anytime. Preemptively, so that we don't have to go through, the appeal process or you have to wait for that assessment to come in.
All done?
All right.
All right.
I have one more question.
Well, we've got Ron coming up from the commercial side as well, so,
Okay.
but you're welcome to ask it now. But yeah, we're now introducing Ron Russ. And Bobby, what's your question for?
Well, my
any of them?
question is, it seems like, so, I don't know, I've been property owner for like, 30, 40 years. And the property assessment, you look at it and it's always been this feeling of that it was always low. Like, I don't know why, but it always felt like it was much lower than what the property's real value was. And so for decades, it felt like that. It doesn't feel like that anymore. It feels like, wow.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot better at our jobs.
Yeah.
Components that are happening. 15 years, 18 years ago, the only properties that actually got addressed on a yearly basis were those that were in that reappraisal cycle window, meaning that the state requires us to reappraise 20% of the total parcel count in the county every year. And essentially what you saw, if you went back and looked in time, is that your value was here. It stayed the same for 4 years when the market's doing whatever. And then you got physically reappraised and it got moved to some other level. Okay, whether physically up, I mean, I don't know if I ever remember seeing them go down, but what you saw is 4 years of flat, no movement, and then a move. Flat, no movement, and then up again, because you were on that 5-year cycle. And so there may have been quite a few years in there where it was artificially low because of that. Now with the ability to address all value annually in mass movement, we attempt to be at full market value on an annual basis on all properties. And that's a big part of it, but also, as Ron described, I think we've got better actionability and have the flexibility to address different value types of components that get us better or closer to your market value.
Also keep in mind, we're using last year's data.
Yeah.
So in an increasing market, we're always going to be low. Because
Trailing the market.
we're trailing the market. We're using last year's data and your assessment notice doesn't come out until June. That's another 6 months. So if the market's continuing to go up, we're going to be low. Now, the opposite of that is if the market's tanking and from January 1st to June, if it starts tanking in January and starts going down, we're probably going to look high. But keep in mind, we're valuing the property as of January 1st, not June 1st when you get your notice.
That's the tough pill to swallow. Huh?
It is. It is. So,
Ron, real quick, we've got a question from a Zoom
sure.
person, and they want to know if it's realistic to assume the assessment process is the same in all.
I would not say that. Each county has their own elected assessor and, they sometimes do things differently. To be honest with you, we are very fortunate in Ada County in that we have access to MLS. We have a lot of sales. Other counties, smaller counties, don't have the kind of sales we do, so they don't always do the thing.
Maybe back up on the valuation, possibly the appeal process is the same.
Yeah, the appeal process is the same.
Yeah.
Well, it should be the same.
Because that's a state.
statutory.
Yeah.
Okay.
The statute says you're supposed to, every assessor has to appraise their properties at 100% of market value, plus or minus 10%, like Donato had mentioned. Now, how you get there, that's not really as cut and dry.
Is the reappraisal every 5 years? Is that statewide or is that
Yes.
county?
And it's up to 5 years, so it could happen sooner. Depending if we're reorganizing things. For me, I'm the commercial appraiser in charge of all multifamily. 5 units plus. So if you have a unit that, or a property that's 5 units plus, I'm your appraiser. There's no other appraiser that does those in Ada County. I have the same type of thing, but where I have to appraise 20% of my properties every year. And I organize that based on the type of properties. So apartments were reappraised in 2021. That's where we went out and we did a very comprehensive survey. Looked at rents really closely, got as much data as we could on expenses to come up with some models. And that's kind of our base point for our valuation. Now, we have increased apartment units tremendously just since 2021. And I'm gonna have to break that up a little bit. So I'm gonna have to break up and reappraise some of my smaller type units. So I've got my apartments organized, 5 to 10 units, 10 to 20 units, 20 to 40 units, and then so on and so on. So the smaller unit sizes will be reappraised sooner than 2026. It'll probably actually happen next year. Just because I'm getting too many properties in that one reappraisal cycle, I gotta spread them out a little bit.
But if you're going to build apartments, so let's say it's 50 apartments or 48, 12 fourplexes. Do you want to try to keep your tax bill lower? Do you want to try to build each fourplex on its own separate parcel so they can be sold off individually in the future? Or do you want to build them all on the same parcel?
Well, that's interesting.
It all depends on the market.
It depends on the market. So, I mean, you have to do what's best for you. There are definitely advantages and disadvantages both ways. You can't always have your cake and eat it too, though. So with that, and we do have properties that are like that. And generally, if it's under one ownership, it'll still come to me. I'll value it. It may not, I shouldn't even say that. It's not always going to be mine. It could be the residential appraiser in that areas. But I'll probably still value it for them and just give them the value and they'll put it on there. If you have a problem with it, they're gonna answer the call and say, oh, you need to talk to Ron, you can transfer you, even though it's under their name. Just because it's kind of it's technically a residential property because it's only a fourplex on a single parcel, but I'm valuing it, so I'm responsible for that. So it's kind of a gray area. So it's really gonna be valued the same from my standpoint or and whatnot.
What about if you build it, but you have each unit in the fourplex kind of deeded separately and so you can sell them off individually?
Like a condo,
Is that different?
same thing.
Okay.
So that's a good, like the Sleepy Hollow apartments down on State Street that just got built last year. Those are condoed at this point. So Tina, our residential appraiser in the area, is under her name, but I valued them for her. Because it's all under the same ownership. The Somerset condos that you showed one that was for sale there.
Yeah.
They've actually got a section that's apartments.
Yeah.
That I valued for them.
And that's the reason it's unmortgageable and the reason they need
Yeah.
to put 20% down, because one owner owns so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So anyways, let me get started here. We had 14 commercial projects get finished last year in multifamily. that totaled 1,337 units. Half of those were what we call mixed use, so it could have some retail or office space combined with it, plus residential, similar to like the more high-rise buildings you see downtown that are being built, where they've got coffee shops and restaurants on the main level and then apartments above it.
1337, did you say?
Yeah, 1337. I pulled Donato's data too. There were 12 duplex, triplex, and fourplex properties built last year, totaling 27 units. 10 duplexes, 1 triplex, 1 fourplex was all that was built in that area. Not a lot. Honestly, I was a little shocked that it was that small. We do have 52 commercial multifamily projects currently under construction in Ada County. Any guess how many units that is? 6,249 units. That is a lot of units out there. This includes 7 projects that have started since January 1st of this year, for a total of 570 units with those. So we're still building apartments. It really has not slowed down much here. I looked at the data for how many people are moving here. People moving here slowed down a lot, but people are still moving here and they still have to have a place to live. Have you seen the new kind of style multifamily projects that are being built, where we've got a mix of single family houses and apartments and townhouses and all that, all built on one parcel? We've got one over on Shinden and Black Cat. It's called the Modern Craftsman at Black Cat. And the same company has another one at 10 Mile in Franklin, or near 10 Mile in Franklin. It's called the Modern Craftsman at Franklin, or 10 Mile. And each of them, one of them has about 200 units, kind of a mixture of apartments, townhouses, regular houses. It's got some commercial stuff in there too. Just kind of little commercial stuff, some live work spaces as well. And then the other unit, the other property over on 10 Miles got about 100 units there. They're all rentals. Decent quality. I mean, they're building them. They're building fast. Just started occupying them at the very end of this last year. Both projects will be done this year. So that'll be a lot of units on the boards. Sales of multifamily products, still pretty strong. I think that you guys have seen that as well. Not as many this year as we did last year, but they're still, the sales prices are still high. TOK reported that the total sales volume for multifamily in 2022 was $650 million, which was a record. Another thing that I was really shocked about, 3 of those sales were for over $100 million each. It's some big sales in apartments this last year. Cap rate for multifamily. Stacy was talking about cap rates a little bit. Cap rates for multifamily are still coming down a little bit from last year. My lowest cap rate last year was 4.75%. This year it's gonna be 4.5%. Look at it.
You guys do your cap rates without taxes?
Yes. So
So it's a slightly different formula?
yeah, so the cap rate is 4.5%, but when we're doing our valuation, we tax load that. So we look at the tax levy rate for whatever area that property is in and add that to the cap rate. So on the converse, when we're doing up the expense ratio, we don't include taxes in that. So it's a little complicated, but it is the most accurate way to determine the value without the taxes playing a part in it. I know you guys usually, almost everybody else, even Canyon County, throws their taxes in there and doesn't load the tax with the cap rate, but based on the International Association of Assessing Officers, that's the best way to do it. And we try to follow the guidelines that are provided. So we're at 4.5%. In talking to the apartment appraiser out in Canyon County, they're also at 4.5%. So I think that's a pretty solid number. With apartments here in Boise, we're still seeing those cap rates compress. Nationally, they've actually gone up a little bit. So nationally, you're gonna see about a 5% cap rate in multifamily. And the cap rates are different based on the type of property it is. Offices, industrial, all that stuff has different cap rates, so. Vacancy is still really low. I left my vacancy the same this year at 4%, which based on what you were showing earlier on your stuff, it's right there. So it's pretty good. I did see that rents have gone up a little bit since last year, generally between 5 and 10%. I don't have great data on expenses. Rent data is pretty easy to come by because I can look at the internet and I see what everybody's wanting to rent the places for. But I don't see necessarily a lot of expense data unless somebody shares it with me. I do anticipate expenses to be higher this year than last year just because of inflation. So I think I've compensated for that. So what does all this mean? Values on apartments are probably going to go about 12% on average from last year. So a little higher than what Donato was saying with the fourplexes and triplexes and duplexes. But that's where we're at. The way I value properties is different than the way Donato values properties, is in that Donato uses sales. It's a market-based approach based on the sales comparison. I use the income approach, which is what commercial appraisers do, because there's not a lot of sales data out there. Although we do have access to MLS, most commercial transactions are not posted on MLS. So I am stuck with scrounging for sales, talking to other appraisers. If you've got you bought a new property and we're appraised too high, and you want to provide the appraisal to us so that we can possibly make an adjustment, I will look at those comparables that they used as well. Just try to determine, where we're at. So a lot of time that data is collected all year round, and then this is the time of year, or last month really, we're compiling it and seeing where we need to be. So I do have some sales, but clearly not all of them. I don't have all the sales that TOK has. So I do like to look at their data that they come out with. Usually around the first of the year. It's usually been pretty close to what I come up with. It's pretty rare that we don't agree on things. But.
How do you find the income data?
So the income data is based off of, so I know how many units you have, unless you've changed them. And I will go to your website, if you've got a website, and look at what you're asking for rents. That's the quick and easy way to do it. So I maintain a spreadsheet that starts in 2021 from when we reappraised it. These are the rents that, these are, I don't have it for every single complex or property out there, but I've got a very good wide variety of them. And what the rents were at that time, I check them again around the first of the year in 2022. This is what they're asking for rents now. And then each year I do that. So that I can see where the increases are. And it's a pretty good system, honestly. Works out pretty good. Talked about assessment notices and when to appeal. Generally for me, if you call me and say, hey, I think my assessment is too high because I use the income approach, generally I'm going to ask, if you'll provide me your last 3 years of income and expense statements and a rent roll as of January 1st, so that I can look at what the stabilized rents are, as well as the expenses. The data that I have on expenses, it really depends on the type of property you have. Generally speaking, your expenses should be around $3,000 to $4,500 per unit for the year. That's what I'm seeing anyways. If you have really high expenses, maybe you have a lot of long-lived items that you went through. You had to replace a roof, you had to replace a bunch of hot water heaters, those kinds of things. Those are generally outside of the expense scope because they're not an every year expense. I'm looking at every year expenses. And on top of that, I'll also put in a dollar amount for reserves too, to help compensate for those things that sometimes come up. So
Your 3 to 4.5K per year per unit, is it vary on, if you're doing a 6 unit versus a 50 unit or?
it depends on the amenities a lot of times. So some of the, and like section 42 properties, they're usually really high. They're in the $5,000 range. They have a lot of expenses generally with those. But sometimes if you got an apartment complex, it's got a pool or a gym facility and some other things that take extra maintenance, you're gonna have higher expenses with those.
What was the section 42 property?
It's a low income housing tax credit program it's a federal government program. We've got a few of them in the valley. Basically, you get a tax credit for keeping rents really, really low. But it's something you have to apply for, and it's generally on new projects. We've got the Celebration Acres apartment complex. It's currently under construction, kind of in the central area. It will be a section 42 property. Say they were awarded tax credits for that. Lake Harley has a new project downtown at 5th and 6th and Grove. The Thomas Logan Apartments. It's right there, kind of by the what is it, the bars and stuff, the Dirty Little Roddy's and the clubs and stuff. It was a parking lot. Now it's a high-rise apartments or mid-rise apartments. That's actually low-income housing. He's got it's a mixed use, so he's got some offices and retail on the 1st and 2nd floors, and then the 3rd to 7th floor, I think, is a low-income housing.
When I've seen those sell run, they've usually used up all the tax credits. Is that what you've seen, or do you see some of them selling with tax credits that transfer on to buyers?
Generally, the tax credits are gone at that point. We don't see very many of them sell, honestly. And those are usually a 10 to 20 year process for the tax credits.
Dave, did you have a question?
Yeah.
On a very interesting presentation, but trying to put the numbers together in it. You know, what I'm understanding is that the spread between the cost of a house and the cost of the apartment is high right now. So one would anticipate that apartment rentals would be way up. From that data point. Lots of apartment units. But then I'm hearing that there are 1,200 units vacant right now. And then I'm hearing that last year there were 1,337 units added.
Mhm.
And you're expecting 6,249 units more.
Mhm.
And okay, and the number of people coming to Boise is decreasing. So I'm wondering if there's going to be an increasing gap between, or an increased number of vacant apartments. Would that be your take home, or is?
It could be. I don't know what's gonna happen. I can tell you in 2021, there were 15,000 people that moved to Ada County. In 22, it was 6,000.
Yeah, and what is it, like 2 to 3 people per apartment? Is that what you figure?
I don't figure that.
Yeah.
That's just the number. That's just the numbers. And honestly, I'm seeing a lot of 1-bedroom apartments. I mean, when they're building these apartments, there's a lot of 1-bedroom units.
How many moved here in 2018?
I don't know.
Before like the pandemic started, like,
I don't know. I was just looking at the recent data through the census. You can go on the census.gov and pull that for Ada County.
okay.
Was that net migration inflow?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because I drive around looking at all these apartments, and as an apartment owner, I'm going, whoa. Well, it looks like we're gonna have a flood of apartments here one of these days. Is that offers that?
Well, I don't know. It really depends. I mean, it is cheaper to rent right now. So you may have people that are gonna unload their houses, sell their houses and rent for a while. I don't know.
Because isn't the issue, it's not a scarcity of all housing, it's a scarcity of low income housing.
Yes.
Affordable housing. There's a lot of housing, but there's a lot of folks who can't afford it.
And Dave, I'll keep the updates coming. We've got a few good economic forums coming up where they look at that and they look at vacancy. And, 2 years ago, they talked about how many units we would have to add to really boost vacancy. And they were describing Boise as a city that lacked units. And they were saying that we needed more units. And so surely it has to have an impact at somehow, but let's see what they're saying now that we do have these new data numbers.
Right, like if you look at certain other city, like say Denver or Dallas or Chicago, the ratio between apartments to homes is a lot different than it is in Idaho. We have a lot more homes than we have apartments compared to a lot of other cities, and that's what they were looking at that study.
Thank you.
So, but Boise's kind of its own little thing, so it's kind of hard to say. I don't know.
I have one last question, and that is if I hire an appraiser, I'm getting ready to sell my house and I hire an appraiser to tell me what's the value before I sell. How much are you guys on board with each other with like a private appraisal versus what you all do?
Well, again, depending on what the market's doing, because we're using last year's data.
Yeah.
He's using very close data, within the last month or two.
Yeah, so fee appraisers have a limit how far back they can go when they're pulling comps. I believe it's between 3, maybe 6 months if they don't have anything that recent. So they're looking at it right there and then.
Nice.
So there's going to be the discrepancy
difference,
within,
yeah.
especially right now where we have the market that's doing this. If it was a stable market, then it would be much easier for us to be able to say, yeah, that appraiser,
Look at a little closer.
right on.
Go ahead. We have a question from Zoom. Leslie?
Okay, so, how does the internet show how much actual rent is for? So they're showing what they're asking, but they're not necessarily showing what the apartment rent is.
No, we use the asking rents or base it off asking rent, but we're not using the rent for that specific apartment for that certain assessment. We use what we consider market rents. So I'm going to look at other similar apartments as well and aggregate that data into a market rent.
And then the renewals, taking that into consideration.
So we value properties based on a pro forma basis as of January 1st. Similar to how you would look at the apartment as an investor purchasing it. So when you have say a 10-plex and the rents are fairly low because they haven't really upped them, you're going to value that at market rents, and I'm going to do the same.
Actually, I have a question for you guys. When you list multifamily, how do you come up with the projected rents? Or is that something you?
That's a great question. So
Yeah.
we do the same thing. And that's who asked that question on Zoom? Was that
It was Cheryl.
Cherie or Sherry Jorgensen?
Sherry Jordan.
Sherry Jorgensen, I'm not surprised that question's from you also, because that's a really astute question. When we're looking at comps and values, we're looking at sales data of closed sales. When you see an appraisal that factors in an active listing, that nobody's paid for that yet. And so valid point, it's what we have to go on a lot of times with rents. So to answer your question, when we look at what's available actively, we look at how many days, a lot of times you can see how many days it's had, but we also talk to other property managers who have actual rented comps. And so that's why First Rate's been such an invaluable partner for us, because they look at, when you ask them for rents, they say, well, we have this one over here, this one over here, this one over here. So you have to blend what you already know has rented and at what price with what your gut tells you on what the market's doing. Do you see rents getting pushed? We've seen rents going up, but more gently than 2 years ago, when we were having 21,000 or 15,000 people coming in a year in 2021, rents were being pushed hard and fast. And now they're being pushed just a little more gently. And I think the number that you used was
5 to 10%.
Yeah, reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, we kind of factor that in and use our guts and what's renting and active rented comps. But then, like you said, Cheryl, we're also. Yeah. All right. We're going to get really close. Donato, you're in here, but if you can get where Donato was. Yeah. See yourself right there. Perfect. Okay. AVID investors here in the room and on Zoom, thank you so much for attending our feature presentation tonight. We have Donato, the newest assessor on the team, who's taking Dan's job. Let me start over. AVID Investors, thank you for attending the presentation. We have Dan Curtis, a residential appraiser. Donato Guerrera, and then we also have Ron, and how do you say your last name? DeRoost, who is the commercial appraiser. And these three gentlemen have helped educate us on what we need to know about our appeals process. Let's start with the thing we didn't really beat to death this time, but we talk about every year, your appeals. You like to say, Dan, that the appeals come around the holidays, right? Memorial Day, the assessment notices. We're gonna get them around the holidays. It always comes around the holidays after Memorial Day weekend. When you get that notice, look at the appraiser's name on the top right and look at the value. And if you think the value is off, the informal appeals process has been highly effective in Ada County. Bobby, I had the best client, one of the best client gifts ever. Someone brought me this basket. It was so nice because I saved them a lot of value on their assessed value because of the appeal that we put together just by comps. So you may need to consult your real estate agent and get their help on it because we have access to the MLS sales data and comps. And that's a service after the sale sort of thing that good agents will help you with, that we will help you with, us at Swope Investment Properties. So do it fast, do it informally, base it on sales data. And we know some of the ins and outs that these guys have been so helpful in coaching us over the years in how to make a strong appeal. It never matters how much it went up. It just, we got to get it within 10% of accuracy. And also, as Bobby pointed out, these guys have really done an amazing job bringing our values within about 10% of accuracy. So if yours is not within 10% of accurate numbers, that's when you need to give me a call, ask me for some help, or hire an appraiser, or do your thing. Informal, fast.
If you do need to do an appeal, you want to do a formal appeal, you have to do it by June 26th of this year, the fourth Monday of June every year, June 26th.
The formal appeal is a deadline, it's statutory, and but let's do that informal appeal before that, because the informal appeal process, once
Once the assessment notices go out, you can make that phone call.
do it right away. Okay, and then Donato was kind enough to say some great things. When we adjust those comps for you, we're going to be using a negative 1.63% a month, which is the downward trend that they reported in single family homes. But didn't you say it appears it's stabilizing at this time in Q2?
Yes, as we're getting through Q1. Yep.
Mhm.
That's what it looks like.
Let me get some update to that. In the first quarter of 2020, the last quarter of 2021 and first quarter of 2022, we are still seeing appreciation in the market. So we didn't reach that inflection point in 2022 until mid-May of this year. So we were still seeing appreciation in the market for the first quarter of last year and didn't start seeing that level of decrease until May of 2022. So as you look, if you're thinking of using that time adjustment in attempting to reach a reflection market value as of the first of the year, know that we have appreciation that occurred in the first quarter that hadn't been realized if you're addressing it in such a manner.
And that value is January 1st.
Correct. And on top of that, while 1.63 is a number that might be generalized as it relates to the county, all property types are different, all demographics are different, and that inflection point may move slightly between probably the month of May through the latter part of July. So
Okay.
Use it as a number to start with, but certainly the appraiser relative to your area will have some more specific information.
The best way to avoid having to make all these adjustments is always to use those sales that are close to that lien date. So January 1st, 2023 is the date that you want to use. Any sale before that, as close as you can get it to January 1st, 2023.
And I've received that feedback when I've helped people make some appeals. They get less comfortable the further you get away.
Yep.
And then in the residential income property, we've had an uptrend of 0.84 a month.
So this
Or
is
0.84%
still multifamily,
a
so
month.
fourplexes and less, triplexes and duplexes.
2 to 4
Yep.
units, 0.84. So our residential income values have held a little bit more than our single family homes. And then once we got to Ron's presentation, we learned that we were at, I've got too many notes here, but you said
I'm about 12%, so it'd be roughly 1% per month.
1% a month. So 12% is what we expect our assessed values for our 5+ units might go up this year. And they're seeing, Ron is reporting rents going up a little bit and those assessed values going up. They're still building in Boise. We're still adding units. Cap rates are still compressing here. We're at about 4.5%. Ron reports. And that seems pretty in line with a lot of the data that I was reporting. Buyers right this second are a little bit more tentative, but nationally they're at around 5. So we're a little bit lagging compared to national. Expenses they're using around $3,000 to $4,500 per unit. And I think it was Donato who talked about it's getting a little bit cheaper to rent right now than to buy based on some certain data, which could help support renters wanting to rent, for one thing. I think.
Unless you're able to put down 20%, 10% to lower that monthly payment, yeah.
Mhm. So affordability and accessibility is part of the story. Our immigration has decreased a little bit. And what else? What was the big thing here? Anything else on the big thing?
I would say, individual, single family houses, your assessments will most likely go down a little bit this year. But the commercial stuff's gonna go up a little bit.
So if your assessed value isn't going down a little bit on your single family home, that might be a little trigger to look at it. Commercially, it's going up a little bit. And we're still adding units, folks. What did we say? How many units last year did we add?
We added 1,337 last year, and we've got 6,249 under construction right now.
Some big wows. So thank you to our appraiser, Ada County appraiser team and the assessor, the appraisers at the Ada County assessor team. Thank you.